the house next door has just been demolished, and strangely it's been quite a moving experience. A week ago there was an old cottage, rundown cottage, wasn't particularly attractive, but as it was being demolished we were conscious that this place was once a home, and all sorts of memories would have been associated with it. Perhaps a new family, new possibilities, different sorts of people, adventures, tragedies, all sorts of things would have taken place in that house next door. And so, and up until that point we had no emotional attachment with it, but watching it being dismantled was quite moving, because we know what a house, and in particular home, means for someone. And no matter how modest it is, there's a profound human need to have a place, to have a space that we call home, in which we create our own kind of family with our own memories. And like I said, now it's just an empty block. And I can remember a few moments ago just standing, looking at that empty block, feeling quite moved. In many ways, that's the experience of many of us throughout the world in this time of the virus. It's as if our own home has been demolished. That piece by piece, bit by bit, the place, the home, the world which we knew and loved has been demolished. And now, after months of lockdown or restrictions, and bearing in mind that some are doing it much harder than others, but after months of this period, it's like we're standing there now in this empty block, conscious that we've lost a great deal, a lot of things that give our lives meaning and structure, let alone the memories and the sentiment have gone, and we're left there scratching our heads. I want to use this opportunity to reflect then about where the Christian faith comes into this experience of the demolished house and the empty block. And in particular, what kind of understanding we have of God or the divine in the 21st century as we face this challenge. And in so doing, I want to go to a parable. And it may seem a strange parable to go to, but it kind of makes sense about the way in which it presents the divine. It comes from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 20, verses 1 to 16. It's the story of the parable of the labourers in the vineyard. The narrative is very simple. There's an owner, a landowner, and he needs some people to work on his farm, on the land, on the vineyard, and he goes out and hires people to work on the vineyard, but he does it in stages. Hires some early in the day, some in the middle of the day, and some towards the end of the day. Now, the upshot of the parable is that at the end of the day, the landowner chooses to pay all the labourers, no matter how long they've worked there for. He chooses to pay them all the same. And of course, some immediately grumble, having worked there all day. And the landowner rebukes the labourers, saying, well, this is my land, and if I so choose to be generous, that's my choice. Now, it's a very simple parable, and Jesus tells it as an illustration of what the world is like under the influence, the creative influence of the divine. It's an illustration in the Gospel of Matthew of the kingdom of heaven. That's about the creative presence of God in the world. And when God is present, then rank or privilege mean nothing. In a way, this parable sweeps aside all the social rules in the name of love. And in the name of love, the landowner chooses to act with remarkable generosity so that all are recipients of the landowner's goodwill. It's a remarkable parable. All the rules are changed. All the rules are gone. We are living in a time in which the rules have changed. Yes, we're standing in that empty block, scratching our heads and wondering where to go from this. And this includes not only our personal experience, but also the experience of the church itself. Very much since World War II, the rules for the church have been changing. And up until World War II, the church was very much a central institution. It was a place in which there were rank and privileges. People knew their place. Now, in order to appreciate something of what the church was like, I want to introduce a concept which comes from a philosopher of science, Thomas Kuhn, who in 1962 wrote a remarkable book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, and he came up with the idea of a paradigm shift. Now, a paradigm is a set of practices, of values and rules, and in Kuhn's case, he was talking about how scientific communities work. But you can apply this notion of paradigm shift to the church. Up until the Second World War, there was a particular paradigm, and whether it was Anglican, Catholic, Orthodox or Protestant churches, there was a paradigm or an example which the church enacted. This is how we behave as church. Most of the churches had a certain kind of hierarchy. Some of the churches, congregational churches, had informal hierarchies. And within those hierarchies, there were ranks, there were positions which were associated with privileges. Since World War II, the church in most places, particularly in Europe and Australia, is no longer a central institution. It has been marginalised. The rules have been changed. And yet in many ways, we still cling to a European white male model of the church with its emphasis on rank, power and privileges. But now, the church in many ways no longer has a voice. In its own way, it is standing in the empty block, scratching its head, looking for some point of contact, some point of relevance in the world in which we live. Ironically, it's often only when we get to this point of being stripped bare, and in the case of the church being stripped bare of its sense of self-importance and its privileges, that we start to rediscover the things that really matter. Remember in the parable, the whole point of the parable was that the divine presence in the parable is a loving presence who chooses to act in a remarkably generous manner. And in so doing, the landowner in that parable completely breaks the rules, or rather sets a new rule. And the rule is that the landowner chooses to be generous to everyone. This is the new principle. This is an indication of what life is like in and under the creative presence of the divine. Now, I suspect that for the church in the next 5, 10 or 20 years, as we start to rethink and rebuild, there's something in this parable that is remarkably sobering and encouraging. It reminds us of how transient those privileges are, the vanity of the church, the self-absorption of the church. It means nothing. What is meaningful is the love of God acted out in the world generously and magnanimously for all encompassing, inclusive, life-giving. And as we begin to reclaim this essence, as we accept the fact that we are in paradigm shift, that the rules have changed and that we have to begin again, it gives us a clue too about how we engage in the world. We're not in a superior position. We don't have all the answers. But just as our church has gone through incredible changes, the rest of the world is in shock. The rules have changed for all the world, the way that we see things, the way that we experience things. And classically, or typically in paradigm shift, there are these moments where we stand, like in the empty block, scratching our heads, wondering where to go. Divine generosity. That's the upshot of this remarkable parable. Given generously to everyone, inclusive, wonderful, renewing. And maybe in the next few months, it's about being open to possibilities and opportunities of expressing that generosity or discovering that generosity. Will give us small clues about the way ahead. In recent months, despite the real gloom and suffering of so many people, we have at times been heartened by the courage and goodwill of ordinary people and communities. We have seen flashes of generosity which are humanising, which are encouraging and inspiring. Those instances of generosity, which for me represent signs of the divine in the world, provide for us a clue at a very personal and practical level about the way ahead. It begins on the basis of the fact that we accept the situation that we have been stripped bare, that we've gone back to the rudiments. And whilst on the one hand there is a powerful sense of loss, certain memories and associations seem gone forever, it's often in this position of being stripped bare that we discover the things that really matter, the things that count, things like friendship, like community, like the experience of generosity, like receiving generosity or acting with courage and generosity. Those indefinable qualities, they're the things that make life worth living, and they're the things that can help us rebuild lives, communities, and churches. Towards the conclusion of the parable, there's this wonderful phrase where the labourers who have been working from the very beginning of the day, they don't like the fact that the rules have changed, and they begin to grumble. And it's such a human element, and I guess in many ways we have needed months in our own right to grumble. But maybe now's the time to change direction and to be open to new possibilities. And I think that image of a wonderful sense of divine generosity, where everyone is included and loved and the recipient of the grace of God, that sounds like a good starting place to me. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer and Sustainer. Amen.